The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
From my perspective, the work of art that we're doing is actually in the people themselves.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Besides being a photographer and a portraitist, Lancia Smith is the founder of Cultivating, a quarterly online magazine, and the Cultivating Project, a nurtured community of writers and artists committed to pursuing spiritual maturity and creative excellence. Lancia writes about brilliant people doing brilliantly good things related to faith, character formation, and the creative arts. I've been so impressed by her commitment to artists as whole people that I wanted to have her on the Habit Podcast to talk about it. Lancia Smith, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited about it.
Well, good. Well, you are the editor-in-chief, the founder, the creative director for Cultivating, which is an online quarterly periodical, and the Cultivating Project. Can you just tell us what those two things are and how they relate to one another?
Simplest answer, and maybe the shortest, is simply to say that Cultivating itself is an online magazine. So it is a publication, and it's designed to be a publication. Mm-hmm. The Cultivating Project is actually the team of people who make up those folks that submit for the magazine. We're an invitation-only membership. So we don't take one-off submissions. People don't send stuff to us and we say, well, this is great, we'd love to run this. This is a team and theme model of publishing. So the way that I would describe that, would simply be that Cultivating is the house, the publication itself, and the project happen to be the people who live in that house. Uh-huh. So it's the Cultivating Project is, without a doubt, the discipling initiative of cultivating.
Okay, so the Cultivating Project is what? It's a community, a relation. It's a set of relationships, or
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a team of people who interact with each other and interact with me, and who submit on a quarterly basis to Cultivating.
Uh-huh. Okay, so this is kind of it's a discipling relationship. It's a how do you describe that relationship among the team?
It's intended to be a discipling experience, but it's also intended to be a place where people can find fellowship with each other. But one of the things that's really critical about the Cultivating Project and cultivating itself is that I am far more interested in growing the people within that team than I am concerned about the magnificence of the publication. Because at least from my perspective, the work of art that we're doing is actually in the people themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a different way of looking at the process of publishing. When I started out, I'd be honest and say when I started out, I was a lot more concerned about an uber beautiful publication, because that's my background is graphics and photography. But the longer I've been doing this, the more I realize that the work of art is actually the people themselves who make up the Cultivating Project. When we started, I asked a very scary question. Still is scary to ask. That when I invite somebody to join the project, I'm asking them to join for 3 years. And, people kind of roll their eyes about the idea of being invited to do anything for 3 years and think, how in the world am I supposed to commit to that? But most people have gone to school.
Yeah.
So this is not totally different. We run this off the basis of seasons. Very seasonally focused in themes. In my perspective, having taught school for many years, is simply that you can't learn very much in 1 year. You can't learn very much in 4 increments. The only time you start really seeing maturity is over a 2 to 3 year period, 3 certainly. So I ask people rather nervously, if you're invited to do this, consider stepping in for 3 years so you have time to grow.
And stepping in doesn't just mean contributing pieces for 3 years. Y'all are meeting, and what does stepping in for 3 years mean?
It can be a few things. Some people, it really is only that they submit, and their lives are complicated, and they're stretched pretty thin. This is a way for them to still be part of publishing. Can sometimes be seen as a salvage effort, to keep some people from just losing heart altogether. If they've had hard blows and they're carrying heavy loads, it's a way to keep them involved in the creative process with other Christians. But we have a small private Facebook group that we meet in as a team. Not everybody joins because some people find Facebook too noisy to want to be there, and it's not comfortable. And I do phone calls individually with many as I can, which is never enough, ever. No. I can never make enough phone calls. And we do that. But we've also recently done something that to me feels really daring, and we've developed editorial teams. So we get people asking frequently, how do they join? And I tell them the hard, mean thing. It's by invitation only. And it's
invitation only, and you're not invited. Is that how you put it?
That's pretty much, yeah. I don't say you're not invited, but I look a long time at people that I think would make a good cultural fit for cultivating, but I also look for the ones that are demonstrating characteristics that need to be there. People need, before I invite them, they need to be writing for the sake of the writing or the photography itself. They can't be doing it with the kind of wistful thing of, I hope that, I can be a writer. Because you and I both know the drill on this. You either are going to show up for doing that work, regardless of the rewards or not. Right. I need people who are really not trying to test this as much as I want to grow them. And a lot of the people that are selected for this are not outstanding in terms of large existing platforms. Few are. But I'm picking the ones that would otherwise have been maybe left behind. Because usually they're just as fruitful. They needed somebody to pay attention.
Yeah.
And that's really key to me. And so we've been really blessed with some remarkable team members. Amy Lee and Kimberly Conway Ireton were with me with Cultivating before we became a magazine, way back when I was still a blog, and still not thinking about this as a publication per se, to involve other people. And as it's grown, I've been very, very honored that they stayed on with me.
Yeah. So you didn't quite get around to explaining what the editorial team, what this sort of scary idea was.
The scary idea was that for a long time, I was everything. I was everything.
Uh-huh.
And when you grow as an organization, that usually leads to a stranglehold. You become the roadblock to anything getting done. And I would like to be able to invite more people to join the Cultivating Project. And I can't unless I have other people within the team able to do discipling and able to pay attention and able to edit. So because we're formed, we talk about being the oaks of righteousness from Isaiah 61. And like an oak tree has branches, we are forming branches within Cultivating so that we can, in fact, have good teams of 10 people, maybe 12 on a team who write within a specific branch, a specific topic area that they can develop and form close friendships and be nurtured in ways that I will never be able. I can nurture 24. I've done this when I was in church leadership where I've, led leaders for a long time, but I'm just a person, just one person, and I have the same amount of time as everybody. So there just isn't enough of me to cover everybody that I would love to.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between editorial pursuits and discipleship pursuits?
To me, they're both, they're two sides of one coin. The editorial part is just the practical part of nurturing somebody in craft. Is the piece that they submitted, particularly in cases where it's a written submission, because obviously some submissions are photography, some submissions are actually illustrations, and those fit into a different category. But for written submissions, the editorial is to help people. One, it's to help them think through whether or not they've said what they mean,
right,
as well as they can say it.
Yeah.
We have co-editors who basically make sure that it's structurally correct. But we're not, most of us are not writing at an elevated status like you would for Rabbit Room. Rabbit Room, we genuinely use Rabbit Room as like the standard of this is what superb writing looks like within the kind of framework that we're going for. So Rabbit Room becomes that high standard to reach for. I'm not expecting everybody in Cultivating to be at that point, and they may never. They may be more humble in the things that they write and less developed, and some of them have outgrown themselves. They thought they couldn't write. And at 2 or 3 years, they're doing things that just blow me away.
Yeah.
So we're excited about that. But the editorial process is this team, a managing editor and a co-editor, who spend time helping to develop people as they do their submissions for each issue that comes out. The other part of that, though, is making sure they have somebody praying for them, somebody to talk through life issues with. Making sure that if things are a struggle, that somebody knows to pay attention and be an encouragement.
Yeah. As I always say, writing issues aren't just writing issues, right? Writing touches on every area of life. Mm-hmm. And so I love hearing you taking that idea seriously, right? That the rest of life, when we think in terms of editorial, that's as if we're talking about, it's easy to think of that in terms of sentence structure and grammar and organization, but I love this broader vision that you're taking. I think this is, but by the way, do you have a model? Is anybody else, do you know other
No.
organizations that are doing anything like this?
No. I mean, there may be,
right,
but I don't know them. I am the only, to date, I think I am the only one I know that took the approach of doing team and theme as a model, because it was explicitly from the beginning meant to be a place to grow Christians in creative crafts specifically. And years ago, I was involved, and you know this, I've been involved for many, many years with the C.S. Lewis Foundation, and probably 16 years now I've been working with them and love them. They're like my blood family, in truth. So we were doing a writer's workshop years ago at Camp Allen, and one of my favorite people in the publishing world is Steve Lobby, who runs a literary agency, and he's just a remarkable human being. And he and I were talking in the lobby between sessions one time, and it's this writers' we're doing a writers' branch at that point, and I know that he'd been speaking at Mount Hermon, which is a writers' conference, and one of the things that we see frequently is that good writers' conferences cover craft. Like, you get all kinds of great training, and you know this, great training.
No, I don't. I've never been to a writers' conference.
You're kidding?
Nope, never been to one.
I thought you'd be like running them. But we would see this training where they're learning about platform and how to establish networking with publishers, and how to do your proposal letter.
That's why I've never been to a writers' conference.
So there's all those good things, and then there's fellowship, and there's some important things there. But what they don't often cover is spiritual formation. And in reality, when you think about the writers that we still cling to and go back to, whether it's Flannery O'Connor or C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or George MacDonald, or, and you can go down the long canon list of important writers, all of them had something in common, and that's called character formation. Character formation is one of the things that I have seen, sadly, horribly lacking, not only in writers' conferences, but in general. And that has a lot to do with why Cultivating was formed, because we're not talking about the 3 C's. This is the thing. The conversation with Steve Lobby was, I said, we need writers' conferences that are teaching not just craft and not just scripture verses, to be anchored in, but we really need to be talking about the integration of craft, character, and community. Because if you take creative people away from all 3 of those, you have people who are stunted or who never completely form. So you have brilliant musicians who may never have been encouraged to be in permanent relationships. And so they're exploited and they end up killing themselves or having ruinous lives. I have been exposed to a lot of that. And as a recovering addict myself, I look at the things about what it takes to form a whole life. And it isn't, Malcolm Guite has had a huge influence in terms of the way that I see what a whole human creative is in Christ, because he's a good example of looking at somebody who's really integrated. But I want to see us growing more Jonathan Rogers and more Malcolm Geites and more Andrew Peterson. I just named all men, but I like men, and so I don't expect us to all be men. I'm hoping that we grow some women like that too. But that's just one of those driving factors, is that when you leave the part out about spiritual formation and teaching relational values, you are not going to have a whole writer or painter. And we all know the story of people who had enormous talents
Right.
in one area, and they were like truncated formation in other areas.
Yeah. And there are some artists who manage to produce while being that truncated, but I also wonder, so you got, Hemingway, who's famously,
Yep.
self-indulgent, but it could also produce. But I just wonder how many people, how much talent just doesn't get developed because, as you said, you're talking about character, you're talking about community. What is lost in terms of creativity? So forget about. I know there are people. I know there's Picasso. I know there's there's Hemingway. People who are relationally unhealthy and still manage to produce. But what about the people who just never produce because they don't have this wholeness that you're talking about? I love I just love what you're talking about here. Because somehow we think of that self-absorption as a prerequisite for great art or something. And I think people like these self-absorbed artists are the exception rather than the rule.
They are. I mean, that's one of the things I think that Anselm Society in Colorado Springs has done a really brilliant job of articulating about the importance of what it means to not be a self-absorbed artist, because even Christians who have grown up hearing the stereotype that if you're artistic, you're naturally moody and you're entitled to be moody and sulking in the corner, or that you're more sensitive than everybody else, and therefore you can't be expected, to have adult responsible responses to things.
Mm-hmm.
I see that a lot. I saw it a lot in recovery. I mean, I saw it a lot in church groups. The idea of accountability, of growing up and becoming mature, is not a popular, widely discussed concept.
Yeah.
And it's an expectation where I would say most modern churches that I have known, I'll just go on record and say that they've fallen short of creating communities that expected people to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this very unbalanced reality of people who want to have something, but they don't want to go through the growth process of maturing.
Yeah. But
Scripture is full of the call for people to become spiritually mature, and they don't shy away from that language.
Yeah.
You become an elder because you become wise and trustworthy, and your integrity has developed roots, and you see the fruit of that growth. And the only way that we do that is if we're in a community with people to see them become old.
Yeah.
To see people become mature is to watch what that looks like. And you can only do that through the very expensive process of spending time with people.
Mm. Yeah.
That's why I can nurture about 24 people in some fashion or another, but I can't really do more than that. I'm just one person. But if I expect my teams to grow up to eventually be reproducing.
Yeah.
That's, we have children and we expect them to grow up someday and be self-sustaining and get married and have babies and go on raising them. Well, same for the body of Christ.
Yeah. So when you're talking about maturing and creative people maturing and creative people helping each other mature, I'm thinking about something, and you just talked about the idea of being sensitive, and if somehow being sensitive, and artistic, that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of being adults. Made me think about something that Helena Sorensen has said. Great. Speaking of, you're looking for women examples of mature artistic people. There's one, and so Helena talks about, and I know this is going to come up again in next week's episode. By the way, in my retrospective, my 100th episode retrospective next week.
Great.
And so Helena is going to be on there talking about. This tidbit is going to make it on to that episode. The idea that, in one sense, yes, we have to be thick-skinned to be productive, creative people. But on the other hand, we do have to be sensitive and thin-skinned to be responsive and attentive to the world around us. So then how do you be both thin-skinned and sensitive and also responsible? And I think one really big part of that is community, which is, of course, you're building there, right? I mean, if I am going to be sensitive, whatever that word means, man, that word has more negative connotations than positive connotations, probably. But if I am going to be sensitive, it is hard to be, mature and responsible. And yeah, I think you have to turn to your community to help you do both.
No, I think that's true.
No.
Jesus was, to me, Jesus is the example, because he was sensitive and he was mature. He was both.
Yeah.
And I look at him over and over, and the older I get, the more I look at him and think, now, how did you do that? And I'm, looking like a kid looking at an older brother. I want to know, how is he brave enough to say the hard things to people that he did,
Mm-hmm.
and yet be the embodiment of love itself? That's a mystery to me. I mean, I always find that amazing. How did he know what the Father's will was, and be surrounded by people that he loved and that he created, and then know when he needed to go away and be by himself, when he was just peopled out?
Yeah.
I get that, because I'm in, kind of a similar, scenario where I'm, a lot of my work, both my day job and what I do with Cultivating and other organizations involved in faith and the arts, requires a lot of intensive attention to people. And, I'm one person, and I'm shy, and I'm very reserved, which most people assume to be otherwise, but that's actually the case. And it takes a lot of energy to be focused as intensely as I am on people. Jesus would have been the same, How did he balance that? And yet somehow he does manage to be spiritually sensitive, emotionally sensitive, and yet in his character, strong. And to me, it does, in fact, always go back, maybe not to being thick-skinned, but deep-rooted.
That's good.
Because when you're deep-rooted, you can take the hits, you can take the things that happen and bend, because your nourishment is coming from deep, where the fluctuation isn't. The upheaval is always above the surface, unless it's an earthquake, then that metaphor falls apart. But, Yeah. I think that the deep-rooted part is really critical. And I think that does, in fact, only happen in community, because it happens in places where we feel safe. I see safety as one of those primary parts of, like, the weight-bearing beams in a house.
Yeah.
Where they say you can take out this thing, you can take out that thing, but you can't take out a load-bearing beam.
Yeah, right.
Safety in a community is one of the load-bearing beams. If you take safety in people understanding what it means to be caretakers of one another out, it isn't safe. Then you get a Facebook forum and it's a mess.
Yeah.
Rabbit Room, I think, does a really, really beautiful job of establishing the framework of expectation of safety. I have worked hard to create that kind of culture in Cultivating. Now, a lot of it, I admit, I learned through 12-step programs, because I was in them for years and I led them for years. So that part allows people, a place to be loved. And if they do something a little bit, out of sync or off kilter, there's enough love to counterbalance it. We've gone through that in cultivating, where people come in with expectations and don't know, what they're going to get or experience, and get mad or frustrated or worked into a froth about something. Sometimes they say things that probably they really ought not to, but there's lots of ways to help grow people in that context. And I mean, that is part of what I do for a living too. So it helps that I bring in, work related training, as it were, to bear fruit in a different part of the field.
So most of as you're forming community, most of what you're talking about is online, correct? I mean, y'all aren't meeting together in a room.
Nope. I mean, there's a handful of us that happen to live within an 80-mile radius of each other, but most of us are not only across the country, but across the globe.
Yeah, that's right. I noticed that as I was looking at the people on the team, as I was looking at the About Us section. So what have you learned about community online? Any tidbits that, I mean, I run an online community. I don't know that I'm especially good at it. And so what tell me about that.
One of the things that I love about Anselm Society is that they were formed on the basis of geographic location and in-person meeting. And it's just freaking magic to watch what they do. I mean, they're just superb at what they do. Rabbit Room.
You're on the board or something at the Anselm Society?
I have been, yes.
Oh, you have?
A lot of years. I just took a step out of that.
Okay.
Not happily, but I can't do everything, and my attention needs to be right now on cultivating. And so I've taken a step out of primary leadership with the C.S. Lewis Foundation and from the Anselm Society, even though I love and cherish both of those organizations, because I need to grow the one that I have to grow.
Right.
Cultivating's got my name on it, so I have to show up for that one.
Yeah, right.
Also,
sorry, I didn't mean to send you off track.
But I will say that the thing, Anselm does in-person community brilliantly, because they've really focused on what it means to be geographically located. The C.S. Lewis Foundation, is a model that I look at, and their community is very globally thrown, and it's based on big events, but they don't do little forums. And so they're launching into a new direction of webinars and engagement that way that gets more frequent connection. Cultivating is sort of, a little bit like Rabbit Room, where we started as, an online publication, but it's grown into something much more than that. But what makes a difference is that we do Zoom calls and we do this little Facebook group, and I do phone calls. And I take the phone work pretty seriously, because even though I've got people in England and Germany and Thailand, we've got very engaged readers who are in Australia and in Japan at this point, and everybody, where the team itself is across the country. The voice is still a voice.
Yeah.
Somebody paying attention to you is still somebody paying attention, even if you can't see their face. And people know when they're loved, but I'll tell you that I do something, I'm not particularly proud of this, because it's so crazy. Nobody should be doing this. But I actually send care packages to my whole team. So yes, I do that. Weird woman that I am. And so everybody knows at some point that they're going to get a cultivating box. I think that there's different ways to say I love you, and that you're more than just a person to provide a submission to fill a space on a website. I try as hard as I can for everybody in cultivating to know that. And I don't I don't do a perfect job. I mean, that's, the stories about C.S. Lewis, and like it's the impossible standard to live up to, how he answered every letter.
Yeah.
And I'm just going, I'm a failure. For years in my bio, I just said, and I dream of reaching 0 in my inbox, but I have 5 email addresses, and no matter how hard I've tried, I have never managed to get below 30 or 40 in every one of those. And they're real people, and they're people I care about. I just cannot answer everybody. So, I wish with all my heart, that I could I could spend all the time with each person and say how amazing they are, because they are.
Yeah.
When you sent me the questions, and when I walk into a room, people know that I came in, but that they do. I mean, and I know that. I mean, so there's a certain amount of presence when I walk into the room, but I'm not expecting people to look at me. I'm amazed by the people I see. Yeah. I really am. So,
well, let me just, since you made an oblique reference, let me just say, what I had said in my note to you was, as I've been looking at your work, I think about what Brown Bannister said in an earlier episode of The Habit. And he says, some people are they walk in a room and say, here I am. And some people walk in a room and say, there you are. And it seems obvious that you're a there you are kind of person. And I like the way you're framing this. That's not strictly, I'm not commenting on your humility one way or another. That's not so much a matter of humility as a matter of being amazed by what's in front of you. It's a matter of paying attention, right? Because the people that we see really are pretty remarkable.
They are.
And when you look at people and you don't think they're remarkable, it's probably because you're not paying attention.
That is exactly correct.
Yeah, and you're missing something.
Because if you're looking, you will be amazed. It's that simple. I learned that from years of portrait photography. And so when I look at people, what people see when they see a portrait that I've done is the person I see that I'm in love with. Because I don't shoot portraits unless I am in love with the person and that face and the world that I see in that face. And I'm mesmerized by the extraordinary things that I see in those eyes, and those cheekbones and that little wisp of hair that's blowing someplace that I'm going to have to Photoshop out, because you'll be embarrassed that it was there, or the little flakes of, hair, debris on somebody's jacket. I mean, I am looking at all of that, but I'm also looking, for, the moment when a shy person pulls the veil away and really looks at me. I mean, I did portraits of Walter Hooper for 12 years. So Walter is notorious for doing a single face in every image that he had photographed publicly. And it was the Walter mask, I think, is the nomenclature that people used for the fact he looks exactly the same in every picture he shot for like 40 years. He never cracked a smile unless he was caught really off guard. But there was no, lean forward, turn your shoulder just right, and smile. Or there's none of that. It was just, and it was so irritating. And so I did pictures of Walter for ages, and I got some good ones over the years, because we had, had tea and cookies at his, tea and biscuits at his flat in Oxford, and got some really beautiful ones because he's talking about his kitty that he loved. And I've gotten pictures of him before at the kilns, when he was there doing talks and, different things. We'd known each other a long time and written to each other for a long time. And finally, like 3 years ago, he came to a function for the foundation in Oxford. And right afterwards, I actually did a set of formal portraits, like portraits. And at first, he's like glancing at me, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but it was lots of people were around. He didn't have a chance to put on the Walter mask because everybody was so excited to be with him. And there's a moment where he turned and he looked at me. I prayed for years, actually, to get a real picture of Walter. Because I really loved Walter. And it wasn't like I admired him from a distance. I really loved him. And, there's just a moment, where he looked at me and I'm looking at him in the camera. And it's really my Walter looking at me. And there's his face. And you could tell the moment when it happens, when somebody lets you see them. It's just such a holy moment when somebody will let you see who they are afraid for you to see, because they have all the guards up. And we're all like that. All of us are that way. It's hard to trust other people to see us, and to see the good, because most of us only see what's broken. I get that. I am really fortunate that I have gifted daughters behind a camera, and I have a lot of wonderful pictures of me. And so I'm one of those women that's really fortunate that I can say I have pictures of me that I really love. But not everybody is. And it just takes so much courage and so much trust to let somebody see you. And on that moment with Walter was, like one of those moments where I felt like the Lord said, it's okay. And here's this moment, be trustworthy and I will show you something. And that picture to me was more of a kiss from the Lord, in some ways, even than from Walter. I don't know why we went off of that.
I love that.
It's an emotional story for me, and I don't talk about it too much. Don't think Walter's death is still hard for me to process.
He just died a year or so ago, right?
A few months, actually. He died December 7th.
Maybe you should explain who Walter Hooper is. Not sure all our listeners will know that name.
Walter Hooper was C.S. Lewis's private secretary, and then he became the executor of Lewis's literary estate. And the role, that Walter had, he's one of the most quiet, soft-spoken Southern gentlemen who lived in Oxford, for multiple years. He moved there in 1964, a month or two after Lewis died. And the C.S. Lewis that people know today, the only reason we know that name, really, is because Walter would never let Lewis's works go out of publication. He was the utter champion of making sure that those books remained in circulation and didn't get lost in, the wave of other publications. Magnificent, beautiful man, and so quiet and gentle.
Did he take on a British accent in his many years? He always spoke like a Southerner?
Nope, he talked just like you.
Okay.
He had that beautiful, he was from North Carolina.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful, soft-spoken Southern lilt.
Yeah. All right, we got to wrap this thing up. Got to ask you the obligatory last question. Who are the writers who make you want to write, or the artists who make you want to do art, Lancia?
Oh, I would have to say, and I know that's going to sound, I'm just going to say, I want to write partly because I am inspired by you, and I am a devoted reader and mesmerized by what you write. But I would also say people who still make me want to write are Michael Ward, Diana Glyer, Malcolm Guite, Walter Hooper. And in truth, I also am extremely inspired by the writers for the Cultivating Project. I'm just honored to get to keep company with them. And they make me able to feel braver about writing when I would be afraid to do so, because my natural language is image.
Yeah.
And so, and I want to grow up to shoot more like Julie Jablonski and Tom Litsky from Cultivating, and my daughter Regina. Yeah, my daughter Tatiana has an amazing eye. They're phenomenal photographers, and so if you think of writing with light, which is what photography is as a form of writing, they're my inspirations in that regard as well.
I hear you when you say, the writers you're actually in community with. That too really makes me, I mean, as much as there certainly are writers who inspire me that I don't know, but it's the writers that I know that.
It is the writers that I know that make me want to do that. Your writing reminds me a lot of Walter Hooper's, by the way. There's a finesse. And so when I read you, it's like reading Walter or reading Michael Ward, when you see what it means to be a man of letters.
Okay. I thought you were going to say because we both write in a Southern accent.
No.
All right. Well, Lancia Smith, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast. It's really been fun to talk to you and get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a privilege. I so appreciate the opportunity.
Good.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.